I was never very tall. My dad he was only 5'6". My mom was 4'11", and I turned out to be, I think, 5'7". I maybe I got to 5'8", but I think I've shrunk. I've always had black hair until a number of years ago. I started to get salt in it, and so I have salt and pepper hair, just like my mom did. She had that all of her life. I was never big enough to really play sports. Basketball, I was too short, but Indiana was a basketball crazy, state. I was always kind of viewed as a quiet guy. In fact, when I graduated from high school out here in Van Nuys, I don't know how they voted. I never saw the ballots, but they have most likely to succeed and all this kind of stuff. And I was voted the most quiet guy in the class. Ha! I fooled him. I was born and raised in a little community of about 2,000 people. Bern, Indiana. Guess by the name what background it has. It's named after Bern, Switzerland. The basic motivation for coming to California was the weather. Both my sister and I, we were not well. I had problems with allergies and asthma. So they wanted to get me in a drier climate, so I thought, let's take a vacation out there. And there were 6 of us, my parents and 4 kids, in this old 34 Chevrolet, and it had no trunk. So my dad moved the back seat up, the back seat up, and puts things in there, and then strapped things on the back of the car. It was like the hillbillies coming. We arrived here on my 12th birthday. You want to know what date that was?
Sure.
That was July the 9th, 1949. So you can figure out how old I am. What happened was my health so improved that my parents thought, why should we move back to Indiana? We were living in Van Nuys, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And that's where we lived for quite some time. In fact, my parents actually lived there until they passed away. So that was a pretty significant thing that when we moved out here, because if that hadn't happened, I would have never met my wife. I would have never married her. We wouldn't have had these 4 children and these 10 grandchildren. And so it's kind of amazing how that decision had such significant implications for the future of our life. So I'm studious. I enjoy study. I love reading. When I went to college, I majored in physics and minored in math. And I was at Pasadena College, which was originally accredited Christian university. It's now a university. It was a college back then. But I got my degree in physics. In fact, I was hired as a physicist for the U.S. government at the Naval Ordnance Test Station in China Lake. Well, something interesting happened about 3 months or 4 months before I graduated. And I was engaged to Doreen. We were going to be married. I was graduating, and our life was set. And we were in a missions conference at our church in Van Nuys. And at the end of one of the services, there was an opportunity for people to say yes to God's call on their life. And that might include possibly overseas service. Well, I wasn't sure about that. But then, as we were standing there, and as I mentioned, we were engaged at the time, well, Doreen went forward. And I thought, what's that about? And then I began kind of dialoguing with the Lord. Am I really willing to do whatever you want me to do, or am I going to do what I want to do? And if there's a difference between the two, which way am I going to go? And so I finally said, okay, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm going to make myself available. I'll be willing. So I went forward too. And neither of us had talked about this. We didn't know why we had gone forward. Discovered that afterwards. And it became very clear that the Lord was leading us into some type of vocational ministry. And so I went that fall to Fuller Seminary. And for the next 5 years, I was a seminary student. From there, we then went through a 9-month missionary internship program in Detroit, Michigan, working in the inner city, then headed for Jamaica. So that's what we did. We got involved with a small school called Jamaica Theological Seminary, and were there for 5 years. But out of that, I began to discover I really enjoyed teaching and training and equipping and mentoring. When we were missionaries, I was pretty enthusiastic. I mean, we were dedicated and we were called. And so I felt things need to move a little faster. And I was one day talking with the senior pastor where I was the youth pastor. And I had all these ideas and plans, for the youth group and so forth. And he just kind of, this guy grew up in Jamaica. I mean, this guy was, he lived most of his life there, and he'd been in ministry I don't know how many years, and so he knew the culture. And, Americans, they've got the answer, and we know how to do this. If you just do this and this, and so, and I remember he telling me, he says, John, you do have abilities, but you're impatient. You need to be patient. It's not going to happen as fast as you want it to happen. So just calm down. Hello. Yeah, right. Well, that was a good kind of and I had to learn that. And that had to do with this whole thing of cross-cultural contextualizing your ministry. You think you've got the answers, but they're not even asking the questions. And even when we came back from the mission field, here I was training pastors, and I had never been a senior pastor. I pastored a church for about 5 years in Corona, California. And meanwhile, I've always been bivocational. So I was teaching part-time at Southern California College, which is now Vanguard University. And I love that. The academic dean said, John, if you're going to continue teaching, you need to get your doctorate. And I thought, man, I don't want to hear that. I mean, I was in this little church. I had 4 kids. I wasn't interested at all. 1 year later, I was in seminary working on my doctorate. My wife and I are both mentors for the students in the school that I began about 12 years ago, Central Valley School of Ministry. So that's official. But unofficially, I have relationships with quite a number of people in the city, and we meet fairly consistently. And I love being with these guys. And the last 5 years, I've given myself to a project. This is one of the bigger projects, and that was I had to get to writing. I had written an initial book back in 2009, and as a result of that book becoming widely used within the denomination that I'm in its missions program, it actually has become our understanding of missions and missiology, how we do missions around the world. I've written 5 subsequent books. We're at a point in our lives where we are seeing fruitfulness become multiplying. For example, the seminary I was involved in with 12 students is now the leading training institution in the Caribbean, with over 500 students with a graduate program as well. And then 2, the school that I started, it's now multiplying. We now have satellites. We have 4 satellites, and now just this past week, the program that we set up now is being adopted by an entire district in Southern California to train their ministers too. Well, that's very fulfilling, and it's far beyond me. And it's when you see your children and your children's children, spiritually speaking, growing and ministering and serving, it's very fulfilling. So I just wanted to say that being fruitful and multiplying, that is the place we're at in our lives right now, and we're seeing it, and boy, we're amazed and very grateful, humbled by the whole thing.
Okay, one last thing. Name 1 to 3 of your favorite things about Doreen.
About Doreen?
Yeah.
Oh, my wife is a very loving and caring person. She's very supportive. And in fact, at one point in our marriage, she kind of felt, well, who am I? I'm besides John's wife. And she's kind of come into her own over these last number of years. And she's become a published author. She's written poetry. She's taught classes. She's done quite a number of things. And of course, she's been a great mom. I mean, if it wasn't for Doreen, our kids would not have turned out like they have. I mean, she's wise, she's caring, she's supportive, she's compassionate, and she's very insightful. She would read my mail sometimes, and I wouldn't appreciate that. John, you're not doing so well today. What's going on with you? And she wouldn't let me kind of meander off on some path. And we discovered that her name in Greek means gift, Doria, Doreen. And my name, John, also means a gift of God. So here we feel that we're a gift to each other. So when you get God's gift, you get the best.